In an earlier video, I tackled the question of who was Hashem before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from a mainly biblical perspective. Link in the description below. I promised to take a look at this question from an archaeological and historical lens as well. This video addresses that, but first, if you enjoy my videos and written works, please like, subscribe, it's free, and share with others. Now, get your shovels and sifters as we dig into the ancient Near Eastern soil for clues. In the wider ancient Near East, circa 2000 to 1500 BCE, the Levant and Mesopotamia were a crowded theological marketplace. El was the high god in the Canaanite pantheon, father of gods and humanity as found in Ugaritic texts, 13th century BCE. El's main contender was a young upstart called Baal, the storm god, warrior, challenger to the very throne of his papa El. El also had a consort, a female deity named Asherah, the mother goddess. So when Abraham sojourned from Ur of Sumer into Canaan, he wasn't inventing God talk from scratch. He was reinterpreting the supreme El as not just a local head god, but the universal source of all that is. We have the Shasu of Yah found in Egyptian inscriptions, 14th to 12th century BCE. These peoples were a problem for the Egyptian pantheon of gods. I have addressed their likely origins in a past video. Egyptian texts mention nomadic groups called Shasu living in the deserts south of Canaan in Edom, Seir, and Midian, the home of Moshe's wife Zipporah and father-in-law and priest Jethro. One inscription dated to the time of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, circa 14th century BCE, refers to the Shasu of Yah, pronounced Yah. This is the earliest known reference to what some scholars say is Yod-He-Vav-He. If true, we have on record a source outside the Hebrew Bible. The implication here is that before Moshe, there were already desert tribes venerating a deity named Yah. However, as an adopted member of a pharaoh's family, Moshe may have already been familiar with the stories of the Shasu and their tribal god. Some archaeologists think, or better yet, assume Israel may have absorbed and elevated this cult into a universal monotheism. However, you know the old saying about assuming. Speaking of the Shasu, this leads us into the Midian connection with the aforementioned Moshe's father-in-law Jethro, found in Exodus chapters 2 and 3. The Torah places Moshe in Midian when he first encounters Yod-He-Vav-He at the burning bush on Mount Horeb. Midianite worship of Yah aligns with Egyptian records of a Yahwist cult in the southern deserts of today's Saudi Arabia. Again, some secular and rabbinic scholars suggest that Israel's encounter with Yod-He-Vav-He may have been through Midianite tradition, which Moshe then reframed as the one God of all after the revelation and encounter on Mount Horeb. Early Israelite inscriptions from the Iron Age around the 9th to 8th century BCE may infer that Yah worship may have started out as regional, but over time spread across the world with the diaspora of Jews at various points in the historical record. Kuntilat Ajrud, Sinai, 8th century BCE, has inscriptions invoking Yod-He-Vav-He of Samaria and Yod-He-Vav-He of Teman, sometimes with, quote, his Asherah, end quote. This may suggest worship of Hashem was, at that time in history, still regional and sometimes tied to a consort or goddess wife. An inscription at Khirbet el-Kham of Judah in 8th century BCE gives this blessing: "Blessed be Yod-He-Vav-He and his Asherah." In the early 8th century BCE, early Israelites may not have yet been strict monotheists. However, over time, prophets such as Elijah, Hosea, Isaiah hammered away at the idea that Yod-He-Vav-He was not one among many, but the only one. Later, under the reigns of King Hezekiah and King Josiah, a death blow was leveled against any mention of any worship of any other god than Hashem, and the concept of a wife for the God of Israel was completely obliterated from public practice. By the time of Ezra the scribe, after the conclusion of the Babylonian exile, with many Jews returning to the land of Israel, the idea of any god other than Hashem was laid to rest, where it remains dead to this very day. Baruch Hashem. From a biblical reframing, Genesis projects God back to creation. Elohim made the heavens and the earth. Exodus roots Yod-He-Vav-He in covenant history. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is revealed fully as Yod-He-Vav-He to Moshe. The prophets that followed insist Yod-He-Vav-He is not just Israel's God, but the God of all nations. By the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, Israelite theology hardens into radical monotheism, the place Hashem had so patiently been driving us toward for centuries. We humans can be a bit slow on the uptake sometimes. So then, putting it all together, before Abraham, God existed, of course, but we humans related to it as El, Elyon, Baal, Shaddai, and among desert tribes, the name was simply Yah. With Abraham, the Eternal is recognized not as a local deity, but the Most High Creator of the heavens and earth. Along comes Moshe, to whom it is revealed that the desert god Yah becomes revealed as Yod-He-Vav-He, I am who I am, the transcendent yet personal covenantal God of Israel. With the later prophets and with the experience of the Babylonian exile, the Israeli people come to fully accept that Yod-He-Vav-He is universal, not just Israel's God, but the sole creator of everything. So, to answer my original question from the first video on this, who was God before the patriarchs of Israel? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was already the Eternal, but humans saw it through different cultural lenses. First as An in Abraham's original home of Ur in Sumer, El in Canaan, then as Yah among the desert tribes of the Shasu, then finally, once certain humans were ready for the revelation, as Yod-He-Vav-He, the timeless, self-existent source of all that is. Wait, there's a fork in the road for us to ponder. We looked at the biblical view in our first video, brushed away some of the ancient dust on some archaeological inscriptions in this one. Now we need to go a little deeper into the rabbinic and Kabbalistic angle, how Chazal and mystics explained why God had different faces pre-patriarchs, and keeping that dust brush handy, we may dig further into the historical critical side, how Yod-He-Vav-He absorbed and outlived all the other ancient Near Eastern gods. It is my hope that by the end of this, we can witness how both the rabbinic, Kabbalistic, and historical critical angles balance each other like yin and yang, or to be more Jewish, like Peshat and Sod. Believe it or not, our sages of blessed memory wrestled with the fact that God seems to shift names or titles depending on context. In the Midrash found in Shemot Rabbah 3 and 6 we read, "The Holy One, blessed be He, said, I am called according to my deeds. When I judge, I am called Elohim. When I wage war against the wicked, I am called Sevaot. When I suspend judgment, I am called El Shaddai. When I show mercy, I am called Yod-He-Vav-He." In other words, one God, different modes of interaction with its creation. Our patriarchs knew different faces for Hashem. Exodus 6 verse 3 puzzled the rabbis. "I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yod-He-Vav-He I was not known to them." Rashi mused that they didn't experience the fulfillment of promises, only assurances, El Shaddai for promises. However, with Moshe, Yod-He-Vav-He is revealed through actual fulfillment with the Exodus and the Torah blueprint for redemption. So, pre-Abraham, source was still source, but humanity only saw fragments. With Kabbalah in the Zohar and later Jewish mystics, each divine name corresponds to a sephira or emanation of the infinite. As an example, Elohim equals Gevura, justice, restraint. Yod-He-Vav-He equates to Tiferet, harmony, beauty, mercy, and Ehyeh defines Keter, pure existence beyond comprehension. Before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, humanity could only perceive lower emanations, Elohim El Shaddai. Through the Avat, Israel learns to connect with higher aspects, culminating in Yod-He-Vav-He's revelation. Kabbalists say the names are simply garments, not the essence. The Ein Sof, infinite, is utterly beyond names, but meets us in the clothing of attributes. Meanwhile, looking through the lens of historical critical academia, archaeologists and historians map a more human cultural evolution. Humanity starts with polytheism to henotheism to monolatry, and finally to the logical conclusion of monotheism. To the secular scholar, early Israelites probably acknowledged many gods, but gave loyalty only to Yod-He-Vav-He. henotheism or monolatry. Israel's prophets gradually hammered the exclusivity clause found in Torah. Besides me, there is no other. Titles like El Elyon and El Shaddai weren't invented by Israel. They were borrowed from Canaanite traditions, but Israel reinterpreted them as aspects of the one true God. Archaeology shows Yod-He-Vav-He may have started as a desert deity of the Shasu, then expanded north into Israelite identity. Then we find the El plus Yah equals one idea, extrapolated from ancient Ugaritic texts that describe El as the high creator god, and the findings in archaeology that in early Israelite religion, scholars see a fusion, Yod-He-Vav-He, or possibly the southern desert god Yah, merges with El the Canaanite high god. By the time of the Jewish monarchy, they're fully identified, Yod-He-Vav-He equals El equals one sole creator. Historically speaking, we cannot ignore the prophetic purge, which is fully supported by Hebrew biblical texts, other non-biblical inscriptions, and archaeological findings, particularly in Jerusalem and throughout the state of Israel since the end of the Six-Day War in 1967 CE. Found have been inscriptions showing that Asherah was once seen as Yod-He-Vav-He's consort, which fully supports the stories of such in the prophets and writings of the Hebrew Bible, which speaks of such thinking and practices of many Israelis as an abomination. The prophets, especially Hosea and Jeremiah, denounced this, proclaiming loudly to all of Israel and Judea that Yod-He-Vav-He stands alone, no consort, no pantheon. The Babylonian exile was the crucible, for out of the destruction, radical monotheism emerged fully formed and has remained solidly entrenched in the Jewish heart, mind, and soul to this day. From the rabbinic Kabbalistic lens, God was always one. Different names reflect different facets of the same infinite source. From the historical lens, Israelite religion evolved, borrowing, fusing, and purging until Yod-He-Vav-He became fully understood as the one God. Woven together, before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God was still the eternal. Historically, humans saw God as just another regional deity. Spiritually, humanity was only ready for partial revelations. The Avot cracked open the veil. Moshe tore it off. The prophets universalized it, and the rabbis both centralized and mystified it. I hope you enjoyed and found something of note worthy of your attention over the span of these two separate videos and written presentations exploring the evolutionary journey Hashem has taken us all on in discovering just who and what is Hashem's revelation to us as to who it is to each and every one of us, not only from the lens of the Bible, history, and archaeology, but also from your own personal lens. All my videos or essays can be found on Rumble, YouTube, Locals, Substack, and Blogger. Until next time here on Shmu's Views, this is Shmuel ben Shlomi wishing you shalom.